Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're taking a deep dive into a silent giant's very calculated move into the electric aviation race, and that's Honda. While the world was watching this absolute frenzy of startups, Honda was in the background playing a completely different game. All right, here's what we're going to cover. First, how Honda kind of came out of the shadows. Then, we'll get into their unique hybrid design, which is a really big deal. After that, we'll look at their step-by-step approach to building this thing, their plan for getting it certified, and finally, what their long game really looks like.
Okay, so first up, the stealth entrant. For the past few years, the whole electric air taxi story has been this massive, high-stakes race to be first, right? Super high visibility. But while all of that was going on, one of the biggest engineering companies in the world was working almost completely in secret.
I mean, think about it. You've got companies like Joby and Archer grabbing all the headlines, right? They've been pushing these super aggressive timelines, raising billions of dollars and telling everyone they'll have these all-electric planes certified and flying people around in just a few years.
And this right here, this is where you see the huge difference in strategy. After basically 4 years of radio silence, Honda comes back out and says, yeah, we're aiming for the early 2030s. Now, at first glance, you might think, wow, they're way behind. But that's not it at all. This is a totally deliberate choice, and it's all because they're making a completely different bet on the technology.
So, why the huge gap in the timeline? Well, it really boils down to a fundamental disagreement with pretty much everyone else in the industry about the core technology, and that brings us to Honda's big differentiator, the powertrain.
So, the big question is, why bet against batteries? I mean, the whole industry has been laser-focused on all-electric, battery power. It makes sense, right? It's cleaner, it's simpler, it's quieter. So why on earth would a car company, a giant that knows batteries inside and out, decide to go down a totally different and, frankly, more complicated path?
And this quote from Honda's eVTOL VP, Susumu Mashio, just says it all. This is so telling. Because they're a car company, they have this super pragmatic, real-world view of batteries. And they basically looked at the numbers and said, you know what? The energy density just isn't there yet, and it's not going to be there soon enough to solve the biggest problem of all, range.
And here's the result of that decision, laid out plain and simple. We're talking about a target range of 400 kilometers. That's about 250 miles. So let's be clear. Honda isn't building an air taxi to hop across the city. No way. They are building a regional transport vehicle, something designed to replace a 3-hour drive or maybe even a short-haul flight. They're playing in a completely different ballpark.
So how are they going to do this? Well, they're using what's called a lift and cruise design. Pretty straightforward, actually. You've got 8 rotors that are just for vertical lift. Think helicopter. And then you have 2 separate props that are just for pushing the aircraft forward once it's up and cruising. The thinking here is that by separating those 2 jobs, lifting and cruising, you can build in way more redundancy and make the whole system safer. Okay, so here's how this hybrid system actually works in practice. For takeoff and landing, the moments that need a huge burst of power, the aircraft pulls from both the gas turbine generator and the battery at the same time for maximum muscle. But then, once it's in cruise flight, it switches over to running more efficiently on just the turbine. And get this, while it's cruising, that turbine is also recharging the battery, topping it off so it's ready for the landing.
All right, on to our next section, the step-by-step approach. Now let's talk about how they're actually building this thing, because Honda's engineering culture is just as deliberate as their choice of technology. Their whole philosophy is validate everything before you take the next big step.
400 plus, that's a big number. Before they even started building a full-size prototype, Honda was out in California quietly running over 400 flight tests on a 1/3 scale model of the aircraft.
And look, this wasn't just for fun or to get a cool video of a model flying around. This was all about disciplined, hardcore data gathering. The whole point was to prove that their computer simulations, their aerodynamic models, were actually correct. They needed to know for sure that what the computer predicted would happen in the real world, especially during that really tricky and complex transition from hovering to flying forward. And all that careful, methodical work is now starting to pay off with some major milestones we can actually see. The assembly of the very first full-scale prototype, that's set to be finished by the end of 2025. And then, the big one, its first flight is on the calendar for March 2026.
So this patient, data-driven mindset, it carries right over into how they're dealing with the regulators. You got to remember, this isn't some startup trying to figure out how to work with the FAA for the first time.
No, this is a company that's already an established player in aviation.
A huge piece of their strategy is this FAA exemption they've applied for. It's for a prototype they've codenamed F1. And here's the critical part. This is for an unmanned, remotely piloted version of the aircraft. This is so smart. It means they can push the plane to its absolute limits, test all sorts of failure scenarios, all without ever having to put a human pilot's life on the line.
And this is where Honda has a massive advantage over a pure-play startup. They're pulling expertise from all over their company. They've got deep, hard-won knowledge from getting the Honda Jet certified with the FAA. They're literally adapting technology for things like high RPM generators and heat management from their Formula One racing team. And of course, they're bringing all their know-how about mass production and hybrids from their car business. That's a powerful combination.
So when you put all these pieces together, it starts to point to a much larger, long-term vision. We're talking about something that goes way beyond just building and selling one airplane. Honda is thinking about the entire ecosystem.
They really see this aircraft as the centerpiece of a whole future mobility network. It's like an aerial layer that plugs right into their ground transportation. The goal isn't just to fly you from vertiport A to vertiport B. The goal is to create a totally seamless, truly integrated journey from your starting point to your final destination.
So really, this boils down to two completely different bets being made in the eVTOL world. On one hand, you have strategy number one, speed to market. It's all about getting all-electric air taxis flying short hops across cities as fast as possible. Then you have strategy number two, the Honda approach, utility at scale. This is a calculated, patient wait to solve the range problem with hybrid tech, all with the goal of delivering a much more useful aircraft for that regional travel market.
And that leaves us with the big question, doesn't it? In an industry that has been completely defined by hype, speed, and this first-mover-takes-all mentality, could Honda's slow and steady engineering-first gamble on range and real-world utility actually be the tortoise that wins this whole race?